Have you ever felt like a burden to your own family? Abeni did. Her uncle threw her off a cart, right into the mud, and crushed the only thing left from her mother, a bracelet, shattered beneath a wheel. But then, a stranger, silent and gentle, offered her an old turquoise robe and said just one thing: "You have the right to choose. Move forward or stop here." For the first time, someone treated her with dignity. This isn't just a story, it's proof. Proof that even when you're abandoned in the mud, you can still rise. You'll witness how a single mango changed everything, how a piece of white cloth became a wedding dress, and how a village, once full of suspicion, stood together to say, "She belongs with us." Abeni, once rejected and claimed like property, dared to burn the apology letter from her past. On her wedding day, she walked into the village church in a dress sewn with blood and tears, the front seat reserved for her mother. If you've ever felt unwanted, this story is for you, because freedom doesn't come from being forgiven. It begins when you choose to walk forward on your own. The shove came without warning. Abeni's body flew off the edge of the cart and slammed into the wet earth. Mud splashed across her face, filled her nostrils with its sour smell, and stung her lips with grit. Her cheek pressed against the cold ground, the thud still ringing in her bones. The cart rattled on, the oxen's hooves slapping through the ruts. The jingling of the bell strapped to the harness fading as the wheels cut deeper into the muck. Behind her, a harsh voice tore through the dusk. "You're nothing but a burden." The words were spat like stones. Her uncle's face did not turn back. Neither man spared her a second glance. Their shoulders hunched against the lowering sky, the rhythm of their ride unbroken, as though tossing her away was no different from shaking loose a sack of grain. Abeni pushed herself upright, hands sinking into the sludge. Her clothes clung heavy and wet, plastered against her skin. The air reeked of rotting stalks and stagnant water, a bitter perfume of abandonment. She blinked through the sting of mud in her eyes and saw it. A small circle of silver glinting where it had fallen beside the ruts. Her mother's bracelet, the last trace of her bloodline, the only relic she had carried close. Her arm shot out, trembling fingers stretching toward it, but the wheel of the cart lurched. A wooden spoke struck the earth hard. The bracelet lay in its path. In one cruel instant, the iron rim pressed down. A sharp crack split the air, and the silver band shattered into jagged shards. Abeni froze. The fragments scattered like bones across the wet ground. Their shine dulled beneath the mud. For a moment, breath would not come. She felt as though part of her chest had been crushed under that same wheel. Her instinct screamed to leap forward, to claw at her uncle's leg, to beg him to stop, to take her back. The shape of the plea rose in her throat, but she did not let it out. She bit down hard, teeth grinding against each other, and the sound of it filled her ears louder than the retreating bell. The cart moved farther down the road, the silhouettes of the men shrinking into the violet haze of evening. Abeni stood swaying, fists tight at her sides, mud dripping from her hair. She could have run after them. She could have begged. She could have crawled across the earth like a dog chasing its master. But something inside her locked, a bolt sliding into place. She stopped where she was, spine stiff, eyes burning. The wind shifted, carrying the dry caw of a crow overhead. Its wings cut across the dimming sky, black against the bleeding orange of sunset. The bird circled, cruel and watchful, as if mocking her. The fields around her whispered in the chill, reeds rustling like the hiss of snakes. Abeni bent down and gathered the largest shard of the bracelet. Its edge sliced into her palm, a thin sting of pain blooming red against the silver. She clutched it tighter, grounding herself in the hurt. If her uncle had meant to erase the line of her mother, the broken piece would keep the memory alive. Darkness deepened with every breath. The road grew silent except for the retreating jingle of the oxen's bell, fading, fading, until it dissolved into nothing. Abeni sank onto her knees in the mud, the weight of her body giving in at last. The cold seeped through her bones. She wrapped her arms around her chest, rocking slightly, her breath coming in shallow bursts that puffed small clouds into the night. She looked at the shard again. In the dim light, it seemed less like silver and more like a tooth of glass, something sharp enough to wound or defend. She tucked it into her sleeve, close against her skin, and lifted her gaze to the endless dark. The sky turned black, stars pricking through the veil one by one. The crow did not leave. It perched nearby, its silhouette hunched and patient on a bare branch. Every few moments it called out, a harsh rasp that scraped through the silence. Abeni flinched at the sound, the echo sinking into her chest like a reminder that she was marked, cast aside, unwanted. Her knees shook with cold. Mud crusted at her elbows, stiffening as it dried, tightening against her skin like chains. She wanted warmth, but there was no fire. She wanted a voice, but there was none. She wanted to close her eyes and wake elsewhere, yet the damp air told her she would wake here, if she woke at all. Still, she did not cry out for them. The words stayed trapped inside, sealed beneath a weight she had never felt before. She held herself smaller, pressing her forehead to her knees, the ragged hem of her dress soaking deeper with each second. The night closed in around her, like a tide. The smell of damp earth filled her nose, thick and heavy. The taste of salt gathered on her lips. Tears, though she had not felt them fall. They streaked clean lines through the grime on her cheeks, silent rivers in the dirt. Her shoulders shook, but her jaw stayed clenched, every sob swallowed into the mud. Abeni listened. She listened as the last sound of the cart vanished. She listened to the reeds bowing in the wind, to the slow trickle of water through the fields, to the crow's harsh croak echoing above her. She listened until all of it seemed to press against her chest, crushing her into the ground. And then, when the silence had grown unbearable, she heard only her own breath, each inhale shallow, each exhale trembling. She knew no one was coming back. She knew the night would swallow her whole if it wished. Still she clung to the shard, pressed against her palm, until the sting deepened, until the pain steadied her more than any comfort could. She lifted her head once more, eyes red, lashes heavy with mud and tears. The road stretched empty before her, a dark vein cutting through the fields, carrying her family away forever. Behind her, the crow croaked again, as if sealing the truth of her banishment. Abeni's chest rose in a shudder. She pressed the shard of silver to her lips, tasting the iron of her own blood, and whispered into the void without words. The night answered with nothing but the wind. She curled into herself, a lone figure in the muck, shivering beneath the vast, indifferent sky. The jingling of the bell was gone now, swallowed by the distance. Only the crow remained, its call stitching itself into her memory, an anthem of rejection. And as the dark closed over her, the question she could not silence clawed at her heart. Would anyone find her before the night did? The first thing she noticed was the sound of hooves on the loose stones of the path. The rhythm was steady, unhurried, unlike the hurried rattle of the cart that had abandoned her. Abeni lifted her head from where she had curled against the cold earth. Her eyes were raw and swollen, lashes clumped with mud, but the sound pulled her upright. The horizon was bleeding into purple, stars already trembling at the edge of the sky, when she saw a shadow cresting the low hill. A man on a donkey, the beast's ears flicking forward, its steps crunching over dry weeds. Her breath hitched. For a heartbeat she thought her uncle's had returned, but the figure was wrong. Not two men, only one, and he moved with an ease that was almost careless. The fading light caught the outline of a blade strapped to his back, its hilt worn but clean. Abeni's hand darted to the ground. She seized a stone, rough and jagged, and hid it inside her sleeve. Her body tensed, her shoulders taut with the memory of being traded, cast aside. The man slowed when he saw her, the donkey snorting as if scenting her fear. He did not speak. He only regarded her from where he sat, eyes unreadable in the half-light, his silhouette outlined by the fire stripe of sunset. She could smell the sweat of the animal, the leather of its harness, the faint acrid smoke from the small fire he must have built before resuming his path. The silence stretched until her heart thumped painfully in her ears. She shifted, fingers squeezing the stone. In the dying light, his gaze flicked to her sleeve, to the stiff way she held her arm. Abeni braced herself for the strike, for the demand, for the same tone she had heard from men who measured others like livestock. But instead he dismounted. The donkey lowered its head to graze at the sparse grass. The man stepped back, unstrapped the knife from his belt, and set it carefully on the ground, well out of reach of either of them. Then he turned his back to her. He knelt, unwrapping a bundle. The smell of baked bread drifted out, warm and yeasty, making her stomach clench with sudden hunger. He placed half a loaf on a flat stone between them, alongside a water skin. His voice, when it came, was low and even, with no command inside it. "If you want," that was all. No questions, no name, no price. Abeni did not move. She stared at the bread, at the water darkening the stone as a drop leaked from the skin. Her body screamed to lunge forward, to tear into it. But her mind screamed louder. What if it was poisoned? What if he was baiting her to come close? What if he was another kind of trap? He did not look back at her. He sat with his shoulders to her, his eyes on the falling sky. His hands rested on his knees, empty, as if he were no more threat than the donkey nosing at the dirt. Minutes passed. The bread cooled. The night deepened, stars crawling higher above them. Abeni's lips were cracked, her throat a desert. She inched forward, her toes digging into the soil, her fingers still curled tight around the stone. She reached the offering, snatched the bread and water, and darted back to the edge of the shadows. She chewed, the crust rough against her teeth, the taste filling her mouth until tears stung her eyes. She swallowed hard, washing it down with a careful sip of water. The liquid ran down her throat like mercy. He still did not turn. His silence was heavier than words. In it she found herself trembling with confusion. No demand, no hand stretched out to seize her wrist. Only distance, as if he was drawing a line she was free to cross or not. Later, as the fireflies rose from the grass, he stood again. From the bundle he lifted a piece of cloth, the color of deep turquoise, soft but worn from long use. He laid it near her without a word. Then he returned to sit by his donkey. Her hand hovered above the cloth. She almost pulled back. It looked like a garment, perhaps once belonging to a woman. She pressed the fabric between her fingers. It was cool, carrying the faint scent of earth and smoke. She thought of the mud drying on her skin, of the chill biting into her arms. Slowly, she draped it over her shoulders. The fabric fell heavy, and with it came something she had not expected. The faint, trembling sense of being sheltered, of being allowed a place. The man gave no reaction. He only leaned back against the donkey's flank, eyes closed, as if sleep could take him anywhere. The stone slipped from her sleeve at last. It thudded into the grass, useless now. She did not reach to pick it up again. The night spread wide, carrying the cool hum of crickets and the occasional rustle of small creatures in the underbrush. Abeni's eyes grew heavy. Her body, exhausted from fear and hunger, swayed. She tried to resist, to keep watch, but the turquoise fabric wrapped her in warmth she had forgotten existed. She felt herself drifting, her head nodding. The donkey shifted, lowering itself to the ground. The man adjusted the bundle against its saddle. He did not ask her to lie down, did not tell her where to sleep. But when she sagged, too weak to resist the tide of weariness, he lifted her carefully. His hands were rough, but he did not grip her as a possession. He set her across the donkey's back, adjusting the cloth around her shoulders, and let her lean against the beast's steady warmth. For the first time since her mother's bracelet had broken, her body loosened. Her breath steadied. She slipped into sleep, her face pressed against the animal's coarse mane. Above, the stars blazed clear, and the turquoise cloth rippled in the wind like a banner of promise. Somewhere behind them, the crow still circled, but its cry was faint now, swallowed by distance. Abeni dreamed not of mud or loss, but of walking barefoot on cool grass, of belonging somewhere unnamed. Yet even in that dream, a question lingered at the edge of her mind, sharp as the shard of silver hidden in her sleeve. Was trust ever more than a fragile illusion, and could it survive the daylight that would soon come? The first stone struck her shoulder before she even knew she was being watched. Abeni staggered, clutching the turquoise cloth tighter around her, her heart lurching in her chest. The square of the village lay ahead, framed by the low huts of clay and thatch, the air filled with the clatter of pestles and the hiss of oil spitting in pans. But the sound stopped as she and Kamari stepped from the dusty road into the open. Work froze, eyes turned. It was as if every hand in the village had dropped its task to mark the presence of strangers. Children gathered first, their thin arms reaching for pebbles, their voices sharp with names that cut deeper than stones. Outsider. Stray. Their laughter came high-pitched and cruel, rising over the sudden hush of the adults. Abeni's chest burned. She tightened her grip on the donkey's worn strap, grounding herself in the rough leather. The second stone bounced off the ground near her feet, sending a spray of red dust up her legs. She glanced at Kamari. He stood a pace behind her, neither shielding her nor joining in the villagers' judgment. His face remained unreadable, his hand resting loosely by his side. He gave no instruction, no rescue. The silence of his stance forced her to choose for herself, shrink or stand. Her throat went dry, and for a moment she thought she might crumble. The weight of 100 eyes pressed against her skin. She felt the memory of mud again, the cold rejection of family, the broken shard hidden in her sleeve. Her fingers curled tight until her knuckles whitened. She did not raise her voice, but her spine straightened, the turquoise cloth shifting with the motion. Her gaze fixed ahead, refusing to drop. She walked forward through the square as if their judgment could not pierce her. The children shrieked, half in mockery, half in surprise at her defiance, and then from the crowd, a small figure broke away. A girl with thin braids and wide eyes darted forward, clutching something round in her hand. She skidded to a stop in front of Abeni, her chest heaving, and thrust it out. A mango, golden and warm from her grasp. She pressed it into Abeni's palm, whispering so softly it almost vanished in the air. "For you," Abeni froze, stunned by the gesture. She looked down at the fruit, its sweet scent cutting through the dust and fear. The girl's hand trembled as she let go, then she darted back to the safety of the crowd, hiding behind an older woman. The villagers murmured, unsettled. Their suspicion faltered, not broken but cracked by the small act of kindness. Abeni's throat swelled. She clutched the mango against her chest, her eyes stinging, the weight of it far heavier than its flesh. Kamari's expression flickered, just enough for her to see a shadow of approval in his gaze before it smoothed away again. He stepped past her then, his voice calm as he spoke to a man grinding millet at the edge of the square. "She will work for food." The man hesitated, his eyes darting from the stranger's steady face to the girl clutching the mango behind her grandmother's skirt. After a long pause, he nodded once. The murmurs swelled again, no longer entirely hostile. The villagers turned back to their tasks, though their eyes continued to follow her every movement. The stones stopped. The silence of rejection was replaced with a wary tolerance, thin as paper but real enough to breathe through. Abeni's hands tightened on the mango. She wanted to devour it, to let the juice run down her chin, to feed the ache in her stomach that had gnawed since before the mud and the broken bracelet. But she held back. She pressed it to her chest as if it were a jewel, her eyes glistening in the light of the setting sun. Around her, the smells of the village returned, the nutty roast of millet, the tang of fish drying in the heat, the faint sweetness of palm wine. Sounds returned too, though muted, like a drum played through cloth. Mortars pounded, children's voices softened into whispers. Life moved again, but Abeni knew it would never move around her. Not yet. She lifted her gaze and caught sight of the girl once more. The child peered at her from behind her grandmother, eyes bright and shy. Abeni gave the faintest nod, a wordless thank you. The girl's lips curved into the smallest smile before she ducked her head, hiding in the folds of her grandmother's wrapper. Night was coming. The village glowed with the soft orange of cooking fires, smoke drifting upward to the stars. Abeni still felt the sting of the stones, but the warmth of the mango dulled it. She touched the shard of silver in her sleeve, then the turquoise cloth on her shoulders, and finally the mango in her hand. Mud, cloth, fruit, pain, shelter, kindness. All of it layered in her chest, a story not yet finished, and still the question gnawed, sharper than hunger. Would the thin crack of mercy hold when the village truly decided her place, or would it close again and shut her out? The stone wheel groaned as it turned, scattering white powder into the air. Dust rose like smoke, curling in the shafts of sunlight that broke through the wooden slats of the mill. Abeni's arms trembled beneath the weight of the handle, her palms slick with sweat and raw from friction. Each push sent pain lancing through her hands, but the wheel would not wait for mercy. It demanded strength she did not yet have. By midday, her skin burned beneath the sun that poured in through the open roof. The smell of ground millet was sharp, almost metallic when mixed with the copper tang of blood. She looked down and saw her blisters torn open, streaks of red staining the handle, before dripping onto the floor. The powder clung to the blood, turning it pale pink, painting her labor with its cruel artistry. She wanted to pull away, to cradle her hands against her chest, but the murmurs outside pressed in through the doorway. Women passing by paused to watch. Their laughter was low, their words sharp. Burden. Weak. Stray girl thinks she can grind like us. Their voices rose and fell with rhythm, striking harder than the mill's wheel. Abeni kept her gaze forward, her jaw locked, though her arms shook. She felt the sting of shame more keenly than the sting in her palms. The turquoise cloth on her shoulders was damp with sweat and dust, and for the first time since she had accepted it, she wondered if she was worthy of wearing it. From the shadows near the doorway, Kamari leaned against the frame. His presence was silent but deliberate. He did not move to help, did not silence the voices, did not shield her from the ridicule. He only watched, his dark eyes steady, his arms folded. He was a wall, unmoving, leaving the choice to her whether to collapse or to rise. Her breath came ragged, each turn of the handle a battle. The wheel moaned, spilling flour in uneven trickles. Her knees buckled, and for a moment she nearly let go. The crowd outside chuckled louder. The sound pressed down on her chest until she thought she would suffocate in it. She swallowed hard, a bitter taste rising in her throat. Then the room shifted. From the back corner, a figure stepped forward, an older woman, her hair wrapped in a faded scarf, her back straight, despite her years. She moved with the calm authority of someone long respected. Without asking, she crossed the floor and took Abeni's hands into her own. Her touch was cool, firm. She tore a strip from the white cloth tied around her waist and wrapped it gently around Abeni's palm. The fabric soaked quickly, blushing with her blood. "Stand tall," the woman murmured, her voice low, meant only for Abeni. Strength does not come from hiding pain. The crowd outside stilled. The woman's name slipped from their lips with reverence. Mama Nala. Her presence bent the air, her simple act silencing the whispers. She adjusted Abeni's stance, lifted her chin with a single finger, then stepped back. "Again," she said. Abeni swallowed the lump in her throat. She gripped the handle once more, the cloth biting into her wounds, the wheel waiting. This time when she pushed, the motion was steadier, her body aligned. Pain still burned, but beneath it was resolve. Flour poured out more evenly, a pale river against the wooden trough. The dust rose, catching the sunlight until it looked like a ghost of snow, fragile yet relentless. Her breath deepened, rhythm falling into place. She felt the burn in her muscles, but also a strange pride rising through it. The laughter outside had stilled, replaced by the quiet sound of grinding. The silence was heavier than their scorn, and in it, Abeni felt herself begin to belong, not through mercy, but through labor. Mama Nala watched a moment longer, then nodded, her eyes approving but unsmiling. She turned and left, her figure disappearing into the brightness beyond the door. Abeni's chest ached with gratitude she could not voice. She pressed harder, sweat dripping into the flour, her heart pounding with each turn, and then she felt it. The weight of another gaze, different from the villagers, sharper, hungrier. She glanced up, and her blood chilled. At the far edge of the doorway, just beyond the light, a man stood watching. His arms were crossed, his expression unreadable, his body half hidden in shadow. He did not join the others, did not mock, did not leave. He simply stared. Abeni's stomach knotted. She looked back down quickly, hands tightening on the handle. The wheel groaned again, dust rising, covering her like a veil. The stranger remained, unmoving, his presence a dark reminder that past shadows were never far. As the day bled into evening, the flower collected soft and white, glowing in the golden light. Abeni's hands were trembling, her arms heavy, but when she saw the steady stream filling the trough, her lips curved into the faintest smile. It was fragile, uncertain, but it was hers. The sound of laughter outside had long since faded. Kamari still stood at the doorway, his expression unreadable, his silence heavy, but not cruel. The stranger's shadow stretched longer with the sinking sun, draping across the threshold like a warning. Abeni lifted her gaze once more, sweat and dust streaking her face, her eyes bright with exhaustion and pride. She had bled into this flower, marked it with her own proof of endurance. Yet just as the triumph began to take root, the shadow of the watching man darkened the door. His silence carried a weight that pressed heavier than mockery, a reminder that the past might come to claim her. The first stream of flour spilled into the trough, soft and steady, but her smile faltered. The man's presence loomed larger as the sun dipped. She gripped the handle tighter, her chest heaving, her eyes fixed on the glow of the flower rather than the darkness gathering behind him. And in that dimming light, with her blood drying beneath white cloth, and her spirit lifting with fragile resolve, the truth hovered like a storm cloud. She had proven herself to strangers, but could she withstand the reckoning waiting in the shadow at the door? The dust of the market swirled in a red haze, stinging eyes and throats, clinging to every woven cloth and open basket. The cries of vendors rose and collided, fish salted and drying in the heat, palm oil thick and golden, millet spread in neat piles, voices all pulling at once. Abeni carried a sack no heavier than her frame would allow, the turquoise cloth tied around her shoulders, her palms still sore beneath the white wrappings of Mama Nala's care. She moved carefully, the stares of villagers still weighing on her, though their hostility had softened into wary distance. Then a shadow cut across the path before her. A man stepped out, blocking her way. His face was sharp, with the familiarity of blood ties twisted into menace. His voice carried the same tone she had once heard from the cart that abandoned her. Cold, claiming, cruel. "I know you." Her chest tightened. The world around her did not slow, but its sounds blurred, as if the market itself held its breath. He reached into his satchel and pulled out a folded paper, stained by travel, but sealed with the mark of her clan. His hand trembled with performance, his eyes glittering. "Your uncle sent me. You are bound to him still. This paper proves it." The market stirred, heads turned, whispers darted through the crowd like quick birds. Abeni's pulse hammered in her throat. The man's voice grew louder, drawing in the audience he craved. "She is not free. She is debt. She belongs to her family's bargain." He thrust the paper high, the red stamp glaring under the sun. The lies tasted official even before anyone could read them. Abeni's knees quivered. She felt the weight of the shard tucked into her sleeve, cold against her skin. The laughter of children who once threw stones seemed to echo again. For a heartbeat, she wanted to shrink, to vanish. But then she felt the cloth against her back, the memory of flower dust soft on her skin, and she stood straighter. Kamari appeared from behind, his step measured, his presence firm. He did not snatch the paper, did not shout. He stood between the man and Abeni, his hand resting on the hilt of his knife. His voice was low, steady, a current beneath the chaos. "She is free. She owes nothing. If you wish to test this, you test it against me." The word struck the air with weight. Murmurs deepened, curiosity sharpening into something else. The man's eyes flickered, but his grin spread wider, clutching at the paper as if it were salvation. You would fight for her. She is not yours to claim. The tension tightened like a rope pulled taut. The crowd pressed closer, their eyes hungry for a spectacle. For a moment it seemed the knife would flash. Blood would spill into the dust. But then a smaller hand broke the circle. Naya stepped forward, her braids swaying, her face pale but resolute. In her other hand she clutched her grandmother's sleeve, pulling the older woman with her. Her small voice rose, tremulous yet carrying clear. She worked, she ground millet, she earned her food with her own hands. The crowd shifted, the murmurs faltering. Mama Nala's daughter, the granddaughter of Jabari, stood now in sight of all. The grandmother's voice followed, deep and unyielding. We all saw it. She labored here. No one may call her debt when her sweat has paid the price. The market exhaled, its noise turning. Faces that moments ago had leaned toward condemnation, now leaned toward defense. The paper in the man's hand looked less like truth and more like a trick. His bravado faltered beneath their stares. Jabari himself, towering and silent at the edge of the crowd, nodded once. The nod sealed it. The crowd would not follow the man's claim. He spat into the dust, folding the paper back into his satchel. His glare lingered on Abeni, a promise that this was not over. Before he turned and melted into the throng, the heat of the market seemed to lift from her chest all at once. Abeni's legs trembled, the mango's sweetness from days before still a ghost in her memory, and now this. An act of defense not from Kamari, not from strength or blades, but from a child's courage. She pressed her hand against her heart, where the shard of silver burned against her skin, and felt her eyes grow wet. As the crowd thinned, Kamari's gaze met hers. He said nothing, but the edge of his mouth softened, just enough for her to see what he carried, but would never speak aloud. That night, when the market fires had died down, and the dust had settled into stillness, Abeni returned to the small room near the mill. On the table beside her cup of water lay a flower, small, wild, delicate. Its petals pale, its stem crooked, as though plucked in haste. She stared at it, her breath catching, her chest swelling with something both terrifying and tender. She touched the bloom gently, afraid it would crumble, her fingers trembling. No note, no voice, just a flower placed in silence. She lifted it, pressed it against her lips, and closed her eyes. The faint fragrance lingered, sweet and fragile, threading itself into her memory like a vow. The silence of the room deepened, the shadows stretching long across the walls. The flower trembled in her hand, and she knew it meant more than kindness, more than witness. It was something she had not dared to imagine could grow in her life again. But even as warmth stirred, the question rose sharp as the edge of the broken bracelet in her sleeve. Who had placed it there? And would their quiet devotion be enough to shield her from the storm still chasing her name? The letter trembled in her hands, as if it carried its own pulse. The seal had been broken by the messenger who left it behind, but the words inside remained intact, ink pressed deep into the fibers. Abeni's eyes scanned the page again, though she had already memorized its lines. Each one bled with remorse, each one pleaded for forgiveness, each one whispered of a home she no longer trusted. Come back. We were wrong. Let us make it right. You are still blood. Her stomach twisted. The words pressed against her ribs, demanding belief. The small room around her seemed to close in. the air heavy with the smell of flour and smoke from the mill outside. Shadows leapt across the walls as the last light of evening filtered through the slats, trembling like ghosts. Her fingers smudged the ink, leaving her own mark upon it. She could almost hear the voices of her uncles, soft now instead of harsh, their tones woven with regret. For a fleeting moment, she wanted to believe it. She wanted to imagine arms that had not thrown her into mud, voices that had not named her burden. But memory cut sharper than yearning, the sound of a wheel crushing silver, the mud swallowing her cries, the cold eyes that had not looked back. Her chest heaved as she dropped the letter onto the table. It landed with a whisper, lighter than the weight it carried inside her. Her hands trembled toward the small wooden drawer in the corner. She pulled it open, and there, hidden among scraps of cloth, lay the shard of her mother's bracelet. Its jagged edge gleamed faintly in the firelight. She lifted it, pressing it into her palm until it broke the skin. A bead of blood swelled, dark and red against the pale silver. The sting steadied her. She closed her fingers, trapping both pain and memory. Behind her, the door creaked. Kamari's shadow filled the frame, though he did not cross inside. His eyes caught the glow of the flame, but his expression held only stillness. In his hand, a small matchbox. He placed it on the table, the sound of wood on wood louder than words. He left it there and leaned against the wall, silent. The choice was hers. Abeni stared at the box. Her breath came shallow, the room spinning with the weight of decision. She looked again at the letter, then at the shard biting into her palm. She thought of the market, the crowd's judgment, Naya's trembling voice standing up for her. She thought of Mama Nala's cloth, stained with her blood, wrapping her wound so she could labor with pride. She thought of the flower left beside her cup, fragile and voiceless, yet heavy with devotion. All of it lived here, in this room, in this life she had built without her uncle's mercy. Her hand reached, slow and deliberate. She struck the match. The hiss was small, yet it filled her ears like thunder. Flame curled at its tip, alive and hungry. She touched it to the paper. For a moment, nothing. Then the letter caught, fire running along the edges, curling them inward. The ink blackened, the words twisted, until remorse and promise turned to ash. The fire spread quickly, devouring every line. Abeni watched, eyes unblinking, as smoke curled into the air, carrying away every plea, every illusion. Her breath caught, but she did not look away. She opened her palm, letting the shard fall to the floor with a dull clink. The sound was soft, but it broke something open in her chest. She no longer needed to bleed for memory. The flames shrank, leaving only a scatter of ash that lifted on the draft and drifted out through the window. She felt her chest expand with the release. Her shoulders dropped, the weight of bloodline chains loosening at last. For the first time since the cart had rolled away, she was not waiting for anyone to return. Kamari's gaze met hers from across the room. He had not moved, had not spoken. His silence was an offering, an acknowledgement of the fire she had chosen. The matchbox sat between them, empty now. She reached across the table and pushed it back toward him. Her hand was steady. Outside, the last light of the day bled away, leaving the sky indigo and heavy with stars. The smell of smoke lingered on her skin, a reminder of what she had burned. She touched her chest where the turquoise cloth lay, and for the first time, it did not feel like borrowed shelter. It felt like her own. The silence in the room deepened, broken only by the faint crackle of the dying flame. Abeni closed her eyes, her breath slow and even. She had severed the past with her own hand. But as the ashes swirled out into the night, carried by the wind, another question rose to haunt her. If freedom could be won with fire, what of love? Would it demand the same sacrifice, or could it be chosen without losing oneself again? The drums had stopped, but the silence that followed beat louder in the chest than any rhythm. Abeni stood in the center of the gathering place, the torchlight throwing tall, restless shadows across the mud walls. The whole village had gathered, faces lit by flickering fire, eyes fastened on her as if waiting to measure the weight of her soul. Jabari, the elder whose word could tilt the scales of belonging or exile, rose from his seat. His voice was grave, heavy with the kind of authority that leaves no corner to hide. "Tell us, Kamari," he said, his gaze sharp as a blade. "Is this girl your wife?" The question cracked the night open. It struck Abeni like a blow, forcing air from her lungs. Every pair of eyes turned to Kamari. The villagers leaned forward, breathless. Some were eager, hungry for scandal. Others clung to a thread of hope, wondering if this would anchor her at last. Kamari stood a few paces away, his figure calm in the torchlight, shoulders unbowed. His hand rested lightly against his side, but his eyes found hers. She searched his face, terrified of the answer, terrified of both yes and no. When his words came, they startled the fire itself. Not yet. The murmur that followed was a storm. Voices tangled, some in outrage, some in surprise, some in confusion. Abeni's heart lurched. The words cut sharp, but in his eyes she saw something else, something deliberate, something that shifted the weight of choice from his shoulders onto hers. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Shame flushed her skin, not because he had denied her, but because she had not been asked. The turquoise cloth on her shoulders seemed heavier than before, as though the eyes of the whole village were pinning it down. She stood motionless, though her pulse raced. That night, after the square emptied and the crowd's voices melted into the wind, she returned to her small room by the mill. Her hands trembled as she wrote on a scrap of paper, her words plain but heavy. "I will leave, so you will not be shamed." She folded it carefully and placed it on the wooden shelf. Her breath shook, her chest hollow, but the decision seemed the only way to preserve the dignity she thought she had stolen from him. Her eyes drifted to the drawer where she kept the shard of her mother's bracelet. She reached instead for the cloth folded beneath it. When she pulled it free, something slipped out, flat, pressed, fragile, the flower. The wild bloom left days before, now dried and pale, preserved beneath a strip of white cloth. The sight stilled her. She lifted the fabric, the same piece Mama Nala had once bound around her bleeding palms. The memory of the old woman's voice came back to her. Strength does not come from hiding pain. Now the cloth bore a second layer of meaning, guarding a secret token of tenderness. Flower and fabric, wound and witness, all stitched together into something larger than pain. Her hands tightened around them both. The note she had written crumpled beneath her palm. Slowly, deliberately, she tore it into strips. The sound was soft, but it thundered through her chest. She let the scraps fall to the floor like dead leaves. She would not walk away. When she rose the next morning, the decision had been sewn into her bones. She sought Mama Nala, who greeted her with a knowing glance. Without a word, the older woman led her into the dim workshop, where bolts of fabric leaned against the wall and needles glinted in the shafts of sun that pierced the roof. Together they worked, night pressing against the walls as the hours stretched on. The white fabric, once a bandage, now became the lining of a garment. Needle and thread moved through it like breath, each stitch piercing, pulling, binding. Abeni's fingers bled anew, drops of red marking the fabric before she wiped them away. Mama Nala did not stop her. Pain had become part of the cloth itself. As the dress began to take shape, Abeni felt her chest swell with something she had never carried before, an intention. This was no costume of survival, no disguise to slip through the eyes of others. This was her own answer, sewn with her own hands. Every stitch whispered, "I choose." When dawn brushed the horizon with pale gold, Abeni placed the half-finished garment on the wooden stand. Her body ached, but her spirit glowed with quiet defiance. She returned to her room, her throat tight with exhaustion and triumph. There, beside her cup, another flower lay waiting, fresh, wild, its petals damp with morning dew. She stared at it, her breath catching, her lips parted into a fragile smile. Whoever left it had spoken more with silence than words could carry. She lifted the bloom, pressing it gently against the lining of the dress, tucking it into the folds as if it had always belonged there. Her chest swelled, her eyes wet, her hands trembling against the soft fabric. She knew now that she would no longer be defined by the village's questions or Kamari's restraint. Her answer would not come in the square, shouted before the crowd. It would be written in the cloth she wore, in the flower she carried, in the choice she made. As the sun rose higher, the village stirred awake. Voices and footsteps filled the air once more. Abeni stood by the window, the turquoise cloth draped over her shoulders, the white dress folded near her bed, the flower pressed against her chest. Her heart beat with a clarity she had never known before. Still, the silence of the question lingered like an echo across the square. Would the village accept her when she finally spoke with her own voice? Or would they turn away once more? The drums began before the sun had fully risen. Their thunder rolled across the village, echoing off the clay walls, bouncing through the narrow alleys, stirring even the children from their sleep. People spilled into the square in streams of color and sound, their clothes freshly washed, their faces bright with the expectation of a ceremony. The scent of roasted maize drifted in the air, mingling with the sharper tang of wood smoke. Abeni's hand shook as she smoothed the white fabric over her body. The dress was plain yet radiant, every stitch carrying the story of her scars and her strength. Beneath the lining she felt the thin touch of cloth that had once bound her wounds, now transformed into part of the garment that would declare her belonging. The turquoise cloth, folded carefully on the chair beside her, waited to be replaced by something greater. Children's voices pierced the morning, shrill and joyous. "They're coming! They're coming!" Their laughter wove with the pulse of the drums as flower petals were flung into the air, bright against the deep brown of the earth. Naya walked at the front, her small hands scattering blossoms with solemn determination, her braids swinging, her face glowing with pride. The church, humble in its clay walls and thatched roof, had never looked so full. The villagers crowded inside, their voices hushed now, their breaths caught. Light streamed through the gaps in the roof, striking the air like spears of gold. At the front, seats had been arranged for the elders, their woven chairs lined in a row, and there, in the very center of them, stood one seat left, empty. Its vacancy struck the eye harder than any presence could. The space had been held, honored, as though someone unseen might yet come to fill it. Abeni saw it as she entered, her breath catching in her chest. A chair for her mother, for the one who had been lost but was never erased. Her throat burned, her heart swelling with grief and reverence. The choice to honor absence instead of denying it was a weighty mercy, one she had not expected. The villager stirred as she moved down the aisle, the hem of her dress brushing the floor, her bare feet leaving soft prints in the dust. Kamari stood waiting, his posture firm, his eyes steady. No smile curved his lips, but his gaze held her, strong enough to steady her trembling knees. When she reached him, Jabari rose, his staff striking the earth once, calling for silence. His voice was a river, deep and commanding, carrying the weight of years. You, who came as stranger, you who bore the gaze of suspicion, do you stand now as one among us? Abeni's chest lifted, her lips parted, but before her voice could break the air, Kamari answered, not with possession, not with command, but with restraint. She stands for herself. I only stand with her. A murmur rippled through the hall. The old wound of doubt reopened for a breath, but then Jabari's eyes softened, his chin dipping. Then let her speak. Abeni's hands trembled at her sides. She felt the shard of memory still hidden in her sleeve, its edge dulled, but its weight unchanged. She felt the flower pressed into the folds of her dress, fragile yet fragrant. She felt the strength of the stitches she had driven through cloth with bleeding fingers, and in that layering of memory and resolve, her voice came clear. I am no one's burden. I am no one's debt. I stand here not because I was claimed, but because I have chosen. If you accept me, it will be as I am. If you do not, still, I remain who I am. The silence that followed was not hostile, nor uncertain. It was reverent, a pause long enough to let her words sink into the clay walls, into the ears of the children, into the marrow of the elders. Then Jabari lifted the long woven scarf of the village, patterned with the marks of their lineage. He stepped forward, draping it over her shoulders. The fabric was cool at first, then heavy, its weight pressing down with recognition rather than exile. Then you are one of us, he said, and the hall released its breath. Applause erupted, feet stamped, voices rose in song. Kamari reached for her hand, his grip warm, grounding. Their eyes met, and in the unspoken space between them lived every choice withheld, every silence honored, every promise yet to be spoken. Outside, the drums rolled again, triumphant. The children danced, throwing petals higher. Naya twirled in her joy, her laughter spilling like water over stones. Mama Nala stood at the doorway, her lips curved in the faintest smile, her eyes glistening with something too tender for words. Later, when the sun had dipped low and the villagers gathered around the mill polished new, a carved plank was unveiled. Its name burned into the wood in careful strokes. Ndoto, dream. Flower dust clung to the hair of children as they ran laughing through the gears, white clouds rising like blessings. The sound of grinding blended with the beat of the drums, a harmony of labor and celebration. But in the church, long after the crowd had spilled out into dance and laughter, the empty chair remained. It sat still in the fading light, petals fallen at its feet, waiting in its silence. Abeni lingered there for a moment, her hand brushing the fabric on her shoulder, her eyes wet. She touched the chair's wooden arm, her fingers trembling. It was not emptiness she felt, but presence carried through memory, and as the night deepened, the scarf warm across her shoulders and the echo of drums still in her chest, she knew she had found not just survival, but a place to belong. Yet the chair, steadfast in its vacancy, whispered its question still. How do we live fully while carrying what can never return? Sometimes life feels like a long road where the dust clings to our feet and the weight of silence presses against our chest. We stumble, we fall, we are cast aside. Yet even in the coldest moments, when the night seems endless and the world turns its back, there is always a spark hidden in the dark, a seed of resilience waiting for the breath of courage to awaken it. It may be no more than a shard of memory, or a fragile flower laid in silence, but it is enough to remind us that every soul carries within it the power to choose. The beauty of human existence lies not in perfection or certainty, but in the act of standing up again, of stitching together the torn fabric of our days with threads of dignity and hope. We are not bound forever by the names others give us, nor by the debts or chains of the past. What defines us is the choice to keep walking forward, to lift our gaze even when our hands are raw and our heart aches. In the struggle itself, we discover who we are. Belonging is not a gift handed down by power, nor a mercy granted by those who once rejected us. It is something deeper, forged in the quiet moments when we decide that our worth is not negotiable, when we dare to speak with our own voice, even if the world waits to silence it. True belonging begins within, and from there, it extends outward, drawing others into its circle. It is not about erasing the past, but about carrying it with grace, leaving a chair for memory, while still making room for the future. In this way, love and community are not acts of possession, but of recognition. They say, I see you as you are, and I choose to stand beside you. That is the purest bond of all, the one that does not claim, but honors, the one that frees rather than binds. It teaches us that even the most fragile of gestures, an offering of bread, a child's small kindness, a flower left in silence, can alter the course of a life. The world will always test the strength of our spirit. It will confront us with betrayal, with loneliness, with the temptation to return to what is familiar, even when that familiarity is pain. But it also offers us the chance to answer with fire, to burn what no longer serves us, to stand tall and claim our place. Each act of courage, however small, pushes back the shadows and plants seeds for those who will come after us. And so the journey does not end with survival alone. It continues as long as hearts beat and hands labor, as long as we choose to create meaning out of hardship and turn wounds into wisdom. What matters is not that the road is smooth, but that we walk it together, carrying one another when the burden grows heavy, leaving marks of kindness in the dust for those who follow. Thank you for sharing this journey and allowing these words to resonate within you. If something in this story touched your heart, let it be a reminder that your voice matters too. I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below, your reflections, your feelings, your questions, and if you wish to walk further with us to hear more stories that carry both pain and light, don't forget to follow and subscribe. Every click, every word, every moment you spend with us helps keep these stories alive, weaving them into a greater tapestry of human connection.